My name is Councilor Green. This is a committee meeting of the Department of Public Works, specifically to discuss the LED streetlight project. I am joined by Councilor Hogan, Councilor Rudd, Councilor Paniagua, President Hudson, and I believe that's it from the council. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Sam and Corey and Rebecca.
Great. Good afternoon, councilors. Thank you for this opportunity to update you on our progress related to both the acquisition and conversion of our streetlight network, as well as the discussions we've been having relative to smart city technology and what that might look like for Syracuse. I just wanted to start with a few introductions as to who we have on the call. So I'm Corey Driscoll. I'm Driscoll Dunham. Don't tell my husband that. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the City of Syracuse. We also have Sam Edelstein, the Chief Data Officer, Rebecca Klosner, Planner and Sustainability Coordinator from our city's Planning Division, as well as I think Owen Kearney is on here, Assistant Director of the city's Planning Division. So that's in terms of city staff. From the New York Power Authority, we have David Maya, who's the lead program engineer, April Contreras, who's the associate program engineer. And then we have Bo Reed and Peter Frangi, both from Guth DeConzo. Bo is the Director of Electrical Engineering and Senior Lighting Designer, and Peter is the Construction Manager. So those are just some of the folks that will be chiming in as we move along in the presentation. We're just going to quickly run through with Sam's presentation through a few of the high-level topics, provide some updates related to each, and then I'll be handing over to them to delve into greater detail. But I just wanted to start with a quick overview of the origins of this project. I know there were some members of the council who were not in office when the initiative started, so I thought this might be helpful. As you may remember, and as this slide indicates, in August 2018, the Common Council approved borrowing $38 million to purchase over 17,000 city streetlights from National Grid. Again, thank you to the council for your support in this monumental decision. I think many on the call agree that this move put Syracuse on the map for a number of influential and important stakeholders. And so we couldn't have done it without the council's leadership and support. So thank you for that. Once we were able to navigate through all the legal implications and all the processes involved in the purchase, work began in July of 2019. I'm going to throw it now to Rebecca and David to provide an update on our progress thus far in the conversion of the network.
Okay, and serving as a liaison between the city and NICA during this street lighting project. We have just over 14,000 streetlights, LED streetlights throughout. On doing the overhead streetlights because that's where the city would get the most savings, and those are pretty much done. We're now ready to move into the phase of doing the decorative streetlights. We still have the streetlights out on the interstates due to those overheads that are also going to be in phase 2. At this point, I do want to let you all know that the construction was paused, as you know, the governor. I think it was March 23rd. In respect of that, NIPA directed the construction company to regular installations of streets. They did continue to do repairs throughout that time. So our repairs continue to be addressed. And the system we've been using repairs so far is when citizens call these into City Line puts those into the log for the contractor, and the contractor uses that as a list of work. So we've been directing most of the work orders to the contractor, some to skilled trades that were for decorative repairs that the contractor hadn't started. But that's where we are at this point, and that's how that's going. We are going to need a street lighting manager, as you are. The person is going to be housed within the D.P.W. So we're currently advertising for that. Qualified. Once that person does come on board, we've also allotted to have a part-time clerk to working for them, so that that person can take some of the clerical responsibilities off of their shoulders. Any questions on either? Any?
Yeah, Rebecca. So 14,000. I guess how many are there total?
There's just over 17,500 streetlights throughout the city. all owned by the city at this point. All right, if there's no other questions, then we'll move on to the next slide there. This is a calculation that the budget office's energy analyst performed for us. They just reviewed all of the national grid bills for street lighting for the first 4 months of 20 versus the first 4 months of 20. Those were the first 4 months that we have actually owned this system. You can see there that our savings so far in those bills has been just over $1 million in that 4 months. Those savings are coming from the elimination of facility fees. And facility fees are sort of like the lease fees that the city formerly paid National Grid for the use of National Grid's equipment out in the field. So that was how it was compensated for that equipment and for maintaining and repairing it over time. So that's where we're seeing the savings. When we have our registry update complete with National Grid, and they will retroactively correct the bills to show the energy savings that we have also been accumulating during this time. So that's in progress. Our street lighting team has been dealing with a data glitch that caused some mismatch between data collected in the field and National Grid's registry. So that was what has held up the registry update to this point, but it is resolved for the most part, so that will be completed soon. Any questions on that slide?
Rebecca, the 2019 column, that represents like the total charge holistically that National Grid was charging us. And the 2020 charge is like the energy charges we've experienced. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate characterization. The 2019 charge was for facility fees and energy use, and the 2020 charge is for energy use.
So are there other like soft charges that we should expect in 2020? So I mean, like we just talked about having to hire someone. Like, are there other things like that we should be considering when we're comparing 2019 to 2020?
Yes, absolutely. That is another charge that is, of course, not shown in this this calculation. Of course, we aren't accruing any expenses for a street lighting manager yet, or for a clerk 2 yet. But there are some other minor things that we will have that weren't in 2019. There are pole fees. Our lights, National Grid's poles, and those I believe are about $6 a year per light. We'll have some expenses related to having to pay underground utilities when there are contractors working in the right of way that need those marked out. So we have a contractor on board now who's doing that, and we are anticipating that will cost about $40,000 a year. And those are the main expenses I think that we need to look at. There'll be some minor soft costs, as you call it, added into the 2020 bills too, like National Grid having to site to disconnect and reconnect power when we're doing work in certain situations in the field.
So Rebecca, you mentioned a contractor. Contractors repair lights too? Do we have a contractor who repairs the lights, or do we use city staff to do that?
Right now, during project construction, until this street lighting conversion is done, NYPA's contractor, or I should say Guz DeConzo's contractor, D&M Electrical, who's doing the project, is also responsible for repairing lights. When the project is finished, it's our intention to have our own contractor in place to continue repairs and continue any kind of maintenance or even capital improvement projects related to the street lighting. So
that'll be additional costs, and that contractor, I mean, that will come before the council for approval of that, a bid for that, or how's that going to work?
Yes, we will be bidding it out. And I think you've already seen in next year's line item for a maintenance contract for street lighting.
Okay. Thank you.
What will the coordinator and the clerk exactly, could you elaborate a little bit more on what they do? Because
they're going to be responsible for all the day-to-day operation and maintenance of this system. So, I can tell you it's going to involve fielding calls from the public and addressing problems out in the field, getting those the contractor, analyzing what's going on via the asset management system to see what repairs are needed. They're going to be the supplies and materials that are needed to do that work in the field. They're going to have to be figuring out a system for the contractor to get those supplies from the city to use out there. They're really going to be setting up a new street lighting division for the first time that will be in charge of all the planning for the street lighting system, all the data operations, the management of the contractors, the inspection of the contractors' work, the paying those bills. I think it's going to be, a wide and varied assortment of tasks that are going to be, housed within their small division.
So Rebecca, this street light, I take they are LED I think you said that before. All LED.
That's right. All the ones that we have replaced so far are now LED. So roughly 5,000 of the 17,500 are LED right now. And when the project wraps up, all of them will be converted to LED.
So what is the cost per light? Do you know?
Oh, I don't have that figure ready to go. We'll probably come up with something, but it does vary according to what type of light we're talking about. Overall, a Cobra head fixture is less expensive to buy, to install than decorative fixtures. So there's not really an accurate, consistent number we can use throughout the entire system. We can get you something if you like.
Can I ask a question, Rebecca? Because I'm listening as you talk about the Cobra head systems. So I do know about the decorative lights, and I looked and I've voiced this concern previously, because I know down there by Auto Row, they have a decorative light head, but it's on a wooden pole. So is that still considered decorative?
Yes, yeah. The other ones that are not considered decorative would be those traditional Cobra head lights. So we do have that situation where we have decorative on wooden utility poles, although it's somewhat unusual.
And we still don't own the poles most of the time, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We don't own the wooden poles that are also supporting other companies' utilities, have national grid lines or Verizon telephone lines, etc. If a pole is not supporting any other asset other than a city-owned streetlight, then that pole is ours. And that mainly applies to the decorative metal poles like you see downtown and in some of our older neighborhoods.
So just to go back to what I was asking Rebecca, you said we are in the last 4 months we have saved just a little bit over $1 million.
Yeah, that is strictly in National Grid bill.
Okay, is that saving per a repair, or is it what is that saving calculated from, and how do you calculate?
That savings, as we're seeing it right now, comes strictly from the elimination of what were called facility fees. And those were the charges on our bills that National Grid in place to have us pay for their ownership of the system, maintenance of the system. If they don't own it or have any related to its maintenance, all the charges are eliminated from our bills. So what we see left on our bills is strictly charges for energy use and for any incidental fees that National Grid has to apply because we've asked them for additional services like disconnecting or power.
Okay.
On that chart that you have there, you said you expect the cost is going to go down by more when they adjust for the energy use.
That's
Do you
right.
have a sense of what you expect it to go down by?
I don't have a number off the top of my head, but I can calculate something for you.
Okay.
And I think we are the city is the one now doing the maintenance, right?
That's correct. It's being done through the NIPA conversion project currently, but from this point forward, yes, it is a city responsibility to maintain all the lights.
So if there's a cost saving like that, Rebecca, I take that we are picking up what we originally designated to National Grid, and now that we are picking that up, isn't that somewhat taking time away, or in some way is the time that we are putting in as a city? Isn't there a cost to that as well, in terms of the manpower and the time that has to be allocated
Yes.
from the state that wasn't already there? Is there a calculation to quantify that amount of time that is being given? Is that equated into the $1 million saving?
It is not in the $1 million savings yet because these costs are at this time being allocated to the LED conversion project. But going forward, yes, you're right. A savings like we're seeing now is not truly reflective of what our real savings, because we will have to use those savings to pay a maintenance contractor, to pay a street lighting manager, to pay the street lighting manager's part-time clerk. And it is quite possible to come into this position and assess what needs to be done and how much time that's taking and what particular expertise is needed. And they might ask you, hey, I need a part-time engineer, or I need a contract to have engineering services for this system. So there may be other charges that we don't know about yet. I think it's possible, but I can't say come down the road. At this point, we do know we're going to need those 2 staffers. We are going to need a maintenance contract. We will need to order and supply materials for the maintenance contractor. So the total of those would be what you've seen in your budget documents for those 2 salaried positions and the street lighting maintenance contract. And if I'm not mistaken, I think $450,000 per year was allocated for that.
So Rebecca, I mean, I think to Councilor Majuk's point, it would be helpful, and I know you might not have all the costs now, but going forward, it'd be helpful to have kind of a document that shows, on 2019, here's what our total costs were to do streetlights from National Grid. And then 2020, here's a holistic itemized breakout of everything we expect to have to pay. So everything from the energy charges to internal staff to maintenance agreements, any of those kind of soft costs, even if we don't know the exact amount, just to kind of have a placeholder, just so that we, again, going back even further, this is one of the premier, projects we've worked on since we've been here. And, I want to be able to go back to constituents and say, like, here's the results, here's how it's worked, here's how we've saved money. So I think having that really clear outline of the costs would just be really helpful to explain that.
I can put that together for you.
I have one more question, Councilor Green.
Sure.
Rebecca, maybe you can answer the question, because I know that we already own some street lights. How many total did we already own?
I'm going to need to verify this to be certain, but I think the number that we owned was right around 100. I'll get back to you with a more accurate answer, Councilor.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there aren't any of the questions about kind of the conversion project and that element, we can pivot if folks want to the smart city technology portion of the program. So I'm going to hand it over to Sam to walk us through where we are in terms of that initiative, if there are no other questions. Take it away.
Thanks, Corey. So Sam Edelstein, Chief Data Officer for the city. The other piece of the project was a $500,000 grant from the New York Power Authority for us to establish some pilot smart city projects. And so we've been working with departments throughout the city to understand where are the things that we would want to pilot within this budget going forward, and working with both New York Power Authority and Guth DeConzo, who's helping to implement, to come up with a plan. So I'll talk through what we have come up with and what we're planning on going forward with. We've had some of these conversations with you in the past. But this is kind of where we're at. So the first important piece is just to cover that we had to focus on outcomes. I think, there are a bunch of different sensors that we could buy that would just be sitting around and collecting data without much of a purpose. And we weren't really interested in that. The thing that I normally say is, eventually these things are going to run out of batteries and we will have to replace them. And so we'll want to make sure that we're paying for batteries that we, care about replacing, and we aren't just having pieces of equipment out in the city that don't do anything of benefit to us. So focusing on outcomes, which meant going to talk to departments and understanding what are the things that they're doing repetitively, that they're sending staff out to do, that could better be just sort of covered and understood through the use of a sensor. So I'll give some examples of that as we go through some of the different things that we're targeting. The other thing that we really had a priority on, I know that we've had this discussion a number of times, is privacy. So looking at avoiding the use of cameras where at all possible. If there are uses of cameras, making sure that the video that's collected, we aren't necessarily seeing that. The video that's collected, there are algorithms that are running that recognize the thing that they're supposed to recognize, and the video is thrown away. We take the privacy of the people that are walking around the city really seriously, and especially in a pilot program where we're still learning about exactly where the limits are. Leaning more towards privacy and just on collecting information on, how are we monitoring the infrastructure in the city is really critical. And then the last piece is, it's a grant program. It's an opportunity for us to test and pilot some things. So in a couple of cases, we may have a couple of different approaches to how we're going to collect this information, just so that we can see which one works out best. We also expect that there may be some things that don't work out exactly as we expected. And, obviously we want to be successful as much as possible, but we also want to try some things that maybe we wouldn't otherwise be able to try without a grant program. So that's the background of how we sort of got to where we got. The things that we've come to that we're excited about testing are the following. So one is being able to monitor road surface temperature conditions. So we obviously in the winter time when roads freeze, understanding, especially on some of the steep hills that we have in the city, understanding if the conditions on those roads would lead to ice on the roads, being able to monitor that from a centralized location so that you could deploy our salting trucks to go and either salt that hill or shut down the road if the conditions required that, is something that is useful to have as a centralized decision-making tool. Looking at air quality sensors so that we know how is air quality in one part of the city versus another, which can give us a whole bunch of information about how are people commuting around the city, are there differences in the ways that things are operating in one part of the city or not. Monitoring if there are parts of the city or streets in the city that have the potential to flood. So whether that's understanding if a catch basin is full, which would then mean that the water on the street doesn't have anywhere to go, or monitoring just if there is liquid or water on the street, is another thing that we'd be able to do with these sensors. One of the examples of this is a thing that staff goes and checks, and a sensor potentially could give us another way of doing this, is monitoring Onondaga Creek. When there's storms, it floods, which then requires us to shut down the creek walk in certain cases. And so if we can monitor that the creek is flooding or is likely to flood, we then don't necessarily have to send a staff member down to check. We would just know because the sensor tells us that, and then we could shut down the creek walk without taking a bunch of staff time to go and check and monitor. I think similarly, vacant house monitoring is another thing that we'll be able to do through this program. both through understanding if someone has entered a vacant property, if there's smoke, so having connected smoke detectors, and also humidity monitors, so that you could sense if there is likely a flood in the basement if a water pipe is broken. And then the last couple of things, trash sensors. So we know that sometimes the trash cans overflow. Knowing in near real time whether a trash can is filled or not will allow us to better and more efficiently go and empty trash around the city, especially in some of the parks or other places where there are public trash cans. And then the last example of a sensor is we know that there are some parts of the city where illegal dumping happens. And so we can monitor if that has happened, and then it could send a signal to us so that we would know, that this has happened, and then could go and pursue and understand, and sort of understand what's happened. So I'm happy to get into details on any of those. The other thing that we'll be able to do is do a pilot for expanding Wi-Fi. We'll be able to purchase about 10 Wi-Fi nodes that we intend to put on public buildings or community centers. We're still working through the exact details there, but especially through this situation, we understand that internet connectivity is just a huge issue that we need to contend with in the city. And there's not a ton of easy, straightforward answers here, which is part of why there's a problem. But we're hoping that with some initial pilot of some expanded Wi-Fi, that can help to give us some answers around where we want to go. And the last thing that the grant would cover is a opportunity to purchase software that would allow us to monitor all of these different pieces. So these are a lot of different things that all tell us different pieces of what's happening in the city. We have to be able to monitor them, and we don't want to have to open up a ton of different screens to be able to see each individual sensor and the data that's coming from it. So being able to see all of that in one place is what we are moving towards, and this software would allow us to do that for most of the things that I've detailed. So that's a ton of information, and I have documentation on all of it that I'm happy to send. And then we also have, again, our consultants on the line who can answer any specific questions as well. But that's an overview of where we intend to use these grant dollars, again, mostly for kind of monitoring the infrastructure in the city and some of the other things that we think there will be an ability to have measurable outcomes that are making us more efficient and more effective in the jobs that we're doing. So happy to take questions on any of that.
Councilor Green, this is Joe.
Go ahead, Joel.
So just a basic question. Now, how much is the grant and for how long is it?
So it's $500,000, and so it's a one-time grant that's a part of this program. So we'll be able to use it to purchase these sensors that I've detailed, and then a few other things in terms of sort of standing up the software and paying for a couple of years of use of it. And so that's what it would cover.
So you have it until it runs out, basically.
Yep. Yeah, and the things that I've detailed we would spend the grant dollars down. Okay.
Second question is, is more of like a little bit of getting into details, but now I understand that having a sensor in a vacant house and the way you would know that something is going wrong, as you said, is temperature. Is measuring the temperature and taking, So I somewhat get that. Now, how would you do it with trash and illegal dumping? How does that work?
Okay, so for trash sensors, there are a couple of different. This is one of the cases where we would have a couple of different approaches to how we monitor how full a trash can is. So one is that you can put the sensor underneath the trash can, and it just measures the weight. So it knows how much the trash can weighs without anything in it, And then it also knows about how much it would weigh based on different amounts that it's filled. And then once it reaches a certain weight, it could send us a signal, or we could check that kind of weight. The other application that we'll look to potentially deploy is trash cans that have a top on them, like the ones that you see downtown. It can actually just see through either a camera or radar to be able to look at just how filled it is. Each of them have some challenges associated, which is why we want to try both. The problem with the weight is that, you know, you could have a lot of trash that doesn't weigh a lot and it still could overflow. So that would be an issue. The other with monitor on the top of the trash can is that we know that sometimes the tops get taken off and don't get put back. So part of what any deployment of this would be is figuring out what is the process for making sure that these things can be effective. But I think that we're also aware that, you know, it's not necessarily totally straightforward. And so there are some things that we need to figure out there. In terms of illegal dumping, so this would be with the use of a camera that would be looking at the same place constantly, and essentially would be able to recognize if something has been left that shouldn't have been left in the place that it's monitoring. I think the important thing to call out is that we wouldn't be able to surveil that that space and look at the video that's coming through. It kind of isn't technically possible through the way that the data would be transmitted. Instead, it would just, you know, it would be watching and it wouldn't report anything until it had something to report. And then it would say, okay, now there's something to report. You should go and check it out. And that's all that we would know. So we would know that there's a timestamp and that it was alerting us. And essentially that's it as far as we understand. And so that limits us from, you know, again, being able to surveil a space, but also lets us know that something has happened that we you know, don't want to have happen in that.
And I take that the installation of those cameras would be informed by places that have frequency of dumping, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Thank you, Councilor.
It sounds like a laundry list of items. So, do you have costs on the different types of sensors? Like we have 5. It's exciting to have $500,000 to spend, but then how far does it go? And what, for instance, while having $500,000 is exciting, I'm not really excited about trash can sensors because I don't think they're going to save any money. Because like, what are you going to do? Just not go to the one can that isn't full? Like you're still going to have a truck. You're still going to have a person. Like you save 3 minutes by not going to the second can in the park. I'm not really sure how that part works. But like I think we have to have a sense of like, what's the investment that we're making? Or like, what are the economies? What do we benefit from at the scale we can afford? What would we benefit if we took it to scale? Like they should probably be ideas that if we took to scale, we would save money or make money, or like really add value. Like even the house ones, I don't see that. Okay, you have a vacant house. How warm is it? It's probably as warm as it is outside. It's cold outside. It's probably cold inside. That's why you cut off the water to such places. Similarly, if all of a sudden the basement flood sensor goes off, like in a vacant house, then it's probably gonna be flooded. So like, okay, so it flooded, we know it flooded, but it's still flooded. So like, I don't see tons of value. Like those are things, like you could put a sensor in your own house if you want to know when there's a flood. So you could manage it maybe more appropriately. But I think we need like similarly, the 10 sensors for Wi-Fi access, that sounds exciting. But then again, how much is it? What space does it do? Like I think without knowing much detail, that I would rather have 20 of those Wi-Fi connection things instead of 20 trash can sensors, you know?
Understood. So it may be easiest for me to just send a spreadsheet of some of the costs, just so that it's not me just running through a bunch of numbers. So if that's okay with you, I can put that together and send that out to all of the counselors. Yeah, I mean, I think that you make a good point on all of those pieces. Part of what we tried to do here again is figure out what are the things that we want to scale and what are the real savings that we would have. And so while there are a bunch of different things here, none of them are coming from me or any really of the rest of us on this during this committee meeting. Just saying like, oh, that would be cool, we should do that. It's all coming from departments saying we spend a lot of time sending our staff out to monitor these things, or your point about a leak in a basement, or a fire in a house or anything like that. I think a lot of that comes to having earlier notification of that is important for a number of different reasons, and so it may not directly save money, but it may increase safety of the property or anybody who's around it. But it also, some of these things we may say, yeah, we don't need trash sensors. It doesn't actually help us all that much. So at least we didn't go and buy them all on our own. We used this grant to allow us to see that they worked or not, and then we can go forward there.
Where are we at in terms of, like, everybody's forgetting what it feels like to go to a restaurant, but it seems like we're at a restaurant and we've got a credit for $500,000. And I would assume there's some kind of menu that we're supposed to order off of. Like, are we free? Like, how, for instance, I would assume we can't use money for anything like a system where people can upload photos because it's not connected to our smart grid. But like, I would rather have a system that you can upload a complaint with a photo and they can take a picture of the fixed thing for our 311, whatever, for our complaint, our city line system, than like a smart trash can. But like, this is where, like, what are the limitations of the menu of the restaurant we're at? And like, have we ordered already? Like, what stage are we at in terms of spending the money?
Yeah, I mean, we have not ordered. I think we're pretty close to ordering, which is part of the reason to give the update here. The menu, there's some limitations around it. I think what our scope on this was trying to limit this to how do we use the network and the network that we've deployed to understand more about what we can do when it comes to sensors here. So your point about, it'd be great to have a system where you can take a picture and report the thing. I know that is a thing that you care a lot about. We are currently in the process of implementing a system that hopefully will allow for that. That's in the middle of an implementation that the water department is running. And so, I think that there are things that can be aligned here with that. So if you said, okay, maybe someone doesn't even have to take a picture of this. Instead, we have a sensor that's telling us that this is an issue and it reports it automatically. I think that those things end up getting intertwined really well. But yeah, I mean, I think if there's certainly some limitation on what sensors are available in the world. But there wasn't a like pick from this list of 100 things. You can pick 10, and instead, we said, let's go and canvass the needs and desires of departments within the city where they think that they could find some measurable outcomes through the collection of information in this way. And, and then we'll test it out. And again, it may not all work. I hope that it does. But at the very least, then, we've used the grant in a productive way to know, does it work or not?
All right, so running with like your commentary there, like the water department, like these interconnectedness is the things we already want to do. Like, are there ways that our streetlights and sensors in those systems can somehow make it so we get water meter readings automated, like without having somebody drive past? Like, can the system have nodes that like communicate to each other to read the sensors within distance of the light?
Yes, so that is something that we are talking about. It probably doesn't fit in this grant just because in order to really push forward on that, there is you have to think about how you scale it and put it into a process that feeds data into all the right places. But the question around, can we use the systems that we'll be deploying and the networks that we'll be deploying to allow for that? Absolutely, that is something that we're looking at. And I think that fits really well in the idea around how do we focus on outcomes here, and where could there be opportunities for savings or revenue, as you point out. Are there any other, and like I said, I will send out a detailed list of some of the costs and other details that you talked about, but happy to answer any other questions here.
I had another question. So you mentioned that you've tried to take the concerns of individual privacy in making all your decisions for this. Could you maybe elaborate on ways in which you did that, or potential? I'm looking at all this and I'm not really seeing off the top of my head like ways that this could be intrusive, but I'm imagining that it easily could be in some ways. So I'm just wondering if what you've scoped out, what your thoughts are, and if you could just elaborate more about your guys' take on personal privacy and how that's factored into your decision making, and how you feel this avoids it.
Yeah. So first of all, other than the illegal dumping monitoring, none of the other sensors have a camera on them. So for like the street flood or catch basin monitoring, they're either looking at how filled is this thing, or is it dark, essentially? Is there something that's covering up the catch basin? And so with that, there's no camera like that I could see you with. And so that is a first step, is just, can we actually see someone through this? There are things where we thought about, can we count how many people are walking down the street, which I think there's a lot of reasons that could be really useful, either from a, how is this part of the city being used and how many people walk down the street at certain times, or even out in our conditions right now, thinking about things from perspective of social distancing, right? But that would require a camera, and even if you could put guardrails on that camera to say we never actually want to see the imagery there, it still opens up some potential. So for things like vacant house monitoring, or any of the other examples, it's a smoke detector, that's in the house, and it just happens to be connected to the network, so that if there were smoke that it sensed, it would just send us a signal. So, the closest that it could get to understanding even that there's a person there is just, if you understood that there may well be someone in the house who did something to create a fire, but even that is maybe that may not even be accurate. So I think that's the first test that we kind of put these things through, is could you see someone, or is there any way to identify who is there? And for these things, the answer is generally no. I think the only place where you might have a question on it is when we're talking about illegal dumping. The control there is, so the way that the data gets transmitted is through the street lighting network, which is, it doesn't allow for much data to go through. So to transmit a video file, it would take months, years to do, just because it barely transmits any information. Really what it's meant for is to say, is this light on or off, or how much energy is it using? Or in this case, did someone do something that they, that we didn't expect to have happen and that we don't want to have happen? And it will only report yes or no. It won't say who, it won't say what the person's license plate number was, any of that. It'll just say, something's there that wasn't there before, that isn't supposed to be there. And all of that happens, it's called edge computing. So all of it happens is at the edge of, we're at the device level. So, the computer runs the algorithm, it says there's something here, and then that's all that it says. So I think that then allows for more control over what kind of information is collected and what we can even see. So those are the kind of controls that we're thinking about here. You know, we absolutely, you know, you all will be faced with questions around more details around surveillance. I'm sure at some point in the future, decades in the future, years in the future, weeks in the future, there will be things for you all to consider. I think what we tried to get to with this pilot program is we didn't really want to tackle those questions right now because there are plenty of things to try that hopefully don't bring up any concerns that way. And so let's try that first, get a handle on it, understand where do we need to create policy, you know, ordinances, whatever to control that. Also to be able to give you all the information that you would need to make those decisions too, and then go from there. Does that help?
Very much. Thank you, Sam. Though I do kind of think it would probably be better if you did get the license plate of someone who's dumping, though.
Well, that's the decision that you all can help to make.
All right, I was just kidding, but thank you. I appreciate your insight.
Any other questions on this?
You have another slide, Sam, or is this it?
That's it. Yep, that's all we got.
Yeah, that's the end of our presentation.
Great. Okay, so I mean, I do just want to reiterate. I think it's helpful if we get a breakout of those costs for the lights. But other than that, if there's no other questions, thank you all for the presentation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.